wanting to get a real shower, not a Gatorade bath, because I want to get focused on Alabama. They got a 5-6 hour head start. So I'm not, I'll be honest with you guys, I'm not interested in celebrating that. We'll look back on that win, and that'll be great. But we're focused on the task ahead. That's the objective, and that's what our guys, they worked their tail off for 3 to 4 weeks to get this opportunity. And it was a 1-game season, and now it's another 1-game season. I'm not focused on Gatorade baths.
But you guys gave us a lot of really positive rat poison. The rat poison that you usually give us is usually fatal. But the rat poison that you put out there this week was yummy.
Welcome in to the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Braden. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And man, we got a show lined up for you. We got a great guest lined up for the show as promised. Wanted to have this guy on the show for as long as I can remember. I've been following his work. He's been doing this stuff a lot longer than I have. And, someone that knows the SEC inside and out. And it's none other than Braden Gall, Athlon Sports. He's the host of their podcast. Now he owns his own company, 440 Sports, that covers Nashville. And they got about a dozen podcasts of their own. Our buddy Chris Lee, who covers Vanderbilt, his podcast is on his network there at 440 Sports. He's an ESPN national radio host. So a really great conversation with Braden. We got to hit on about 10 different SEC teams. So we'll get to that in just a moment. But hey, as you guys know, you've been listening to the latest shows. I'm becoming a little bit of a basketball guy here. Slightly. I'm not overdoing it. This isn't that SEC basketball podcast by any means. But hey, I just want everyone to be aware, if they're super casual fans like I am, they wait for the SEC tournament. They wait for the NCAA tournament. We're getting a little preview of the upcoming SEC tournament this weekend with 2 fantastic basketball games. The top 4 current seeds in the SEC all going head-to-head. So I just wanted to bring this to everybody's attention. And both games nationally televised, starting with a game Saturday on CBS. Kentucky, which is currently the number 2 seed in the SEC, at Arkansas, number 3 in the SEC at 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central. Again, nationally televised by CBS. That's going to be one hell of a game. Both these teams are on a tear right now. And then not to be outdone, equally fantastic game. The number 1 seed in the SEC right now, Auburn, on the road at Tennessee, currently number 4. And these teams can finish basically in any order. They're that tight. So things are really going to be up for grabs this weekend. The Auburn-Tennessee game, 4 o'clock Eastern, 3 o'clock Central, nationally televised by ESPN. So if you're just getting into basketball like me, this is the perfect Saturday to get into 2 fantastic SEC basketball games, and probably, the seeding for the SEC tournament and seeding for the NCAA tournament going to be decided here on Saturday in the SEC. So, hey, if you got the day off, definitely worth checking out those 2 games. But, hey, on with the show. This is, of course, a football show, and we had some interesting news. Sorta. It's not official by any means, but there was rumors and speculation that if you've not been paying attention to it, and I don't blame you if you haven't, because it's Pac-12 football, but Arizona State quarterback Jayden Daniels entered the transfer portal about a week or 2 ago. But so he was their starting quarterback. This guy get a ton of praise. He had a fantastic freshman season. Not the next 2 seasons, not as good for him, but there was a report that Jayden Daniels headed to Missouri. That has since been disputed by Daniels himself. So let's throw this up. He's tweeted it out himself. I am not committed anywhere as of right now. Thank you. Just wanted to bring this to everybody's attention because we may have a new quarterback to break down in the SEC if Jayden Daniels, former Arizona State starting quarterback, does make the decision to go to Missouri. And again, that's not official. But the Tigers, man, they've got, this is a big year. Drinkowitz year 3. Connor Bazelak, of course, no longer with the team. Got a 3-man quarterback race here between Brady Cook, the guy that started the bowl game there for Missouri, Tyler Macon, former Elite 11 quarterback prospect. And I think the odds-on favorite to win that starting job this offseason. And then incoming true freshman 4-star Sam Horn, who there's a ton of hype around this kid. But we got a 3-man race here at Missouri. The only thing, those three, none of them have much experience at the collegiate level. So adding another arm would make some sense for Drinkwitz. You know, he can't sit here and play. You don't want to piss off the quarterbacks you got on your roster, but at the end of the day, you got to play the guy that wins the job. And, if you're afraid of a little competition, you're probably not man enough to play in the SEC, particularly be a starting quarterback for a team on the rise. So here's a little insight into this Jayden Daniels, his numbers. Again, his freshman year was fantastic. 60% completion percentage, 2,943 passing yards, 17 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions in 12 games of action. But the following season, only played in 4 games, 58% completion percentage, 703 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. And then last year really went off the train tracks here. 65% completion percentage, that's pretty good. But 2,381 passing yards, 10 touchdowns, 10 interceptions in 13 games. And I've seen some of the analytics from some of the people that I trust. Daniels was hovering around 90th best in the nation. So at that point, I mean, I don't know what the story is. I've never watched this guy play at Arizona State, but if he was the 90th best starting quarterback in the country last year, I'm not really seeing why Missouri would want to add this guy to their quarterback room. I think you got to go with the guys that are been in your system and know it, and that's just my read on it. Unless, maybe he was injured, maybe he was banged up. We'll see what happens there with Jayden Daniels, but he may be headed to Missouri. Of course, we'll keep you updated on that. But just an interesting situation. And, if Daniels really is the 90th best quarterback in the country, that may say something about what Drinkwitz thinks about his current crop, which 2 of the 3 he recruited himself. So I don't know. I don't know what to read into that, but just something to monitor heading into the weekend here if you're a Mizzou fan. But all right, so hey, I do got some LSU comments here as well we're going to play, but before we get to that, we're going to finish the show with that. I've held off long enough. Let's get to our interview here with Braden Gall, Athlon Sports, 440 Sports, ESPN national radio host, one of the busiest guys in college football. Let's kick it over to our interview. All right, we're pleased to be joined by Braden Gall, long time follower of this guy. I've been wanting to have him on the show for as long as I can remember because I've been listening to the Athlon Sports Cover 2 podcast for years and years, which he does with a friend of the show, Steven Lasson, who's been on the show a number of times. And Braden, I joke, but not really. You're like the busiest man in sports media. You own your own business, 440 Sports, which has an outstanding SEC podcast, The Fringe Element. You're an ESPN radio national host. How many hours a week you working there, my man?
Less now that it's not football season, but during the football season, it's 7 days a week. There's no question about that.
Yeah, no doubt. And I forgot. Don't forget to give Braden a follow at Braden Gall on the Twitter machine. But I cannot thank you enough for joining the show and giving me a little bit of your time here.
Yeah, not a problem, man. Happy to be here. Love what you guys have been doing for a while, and kind of upset a little bit that Steven's been on the show before me. I'll have to mention that to him, but no, glad to be here, man. Excited and ready to talk ball. So let's go.
Absolutely. And then, man, add another one to the list. You also write articles, and that's, the main reason I wanted to have you on, because one of your recent articles here on BetMGM, 4 teams that can win the next national championship, in your opinion. And I love the fact that 3 of them are from the SEC, so that's going to be good for you and I. Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, and Ohio State. Let's just focus on the 3 SEC teams. Why are those 3? I mean, Alabama and Georgia, I think that's kind of obvious, but throwing Texas A&M into the mix, why are these the 4 in your mind that can, the only 4 that can win the next national championship?
Well, I think we've learned in modern college football, excuse me, I'm choked up about this. I think we've learned in modern college football that, you have to have a certain level of athlete to win a college football national championship. And it's not just like your top 5% or 10% or 30%. Like you need 60, 70% of your roster needs to be blue chippers. They need to be 4 and 5 star players. And really, to win the national championship, which part of that, the point of that article that you're referencing is, I think there's way more teams that can get into the playoff than anyone ever gives sort of college football credit. I think 40, 50, 60 teams could be considered quote unquote contenders to get into the playoff. The question is how many could actually win 2 games against teams of Alabama's caliber. And I'll just use Alabama as like a stand-in here. But that's what you have to do. You know, Michigan, if you wanted to win a title, Michigan would have to have beaten Georgia and Alabama in back-to-back games on top of beating Ohio State at the end of the regular season. How many teams can do that? And to do that, you have to have elite athletes. You probably also have to have elite coaching to some degree. You probably need a star quarterback. Like you need all these different pieces. And which teams, to me, and I sort of like threw out all the metrics, and I just, you know, whether it's an advanced metric or an ancient metric, and I just said, what teams have the best combination of athletes and coaching? And obviously, to your point, Alabama, Georgia sort of goes without saying. I think Ohio State's in that mix because of their talent and because of their path and because they dominate the Big Ten and their coaching staff is excellent. They got a great quarterback. I think A&M is the one that people sort of raise their eyebrows at, but that's, you know, 4 consecutive top 8 recruiting classes. 3 of those 4 have been in the top, I think 6 or 5, and obviously the best class in America ever assembled this past year. We've seen Jimbo Fisher win a championship with a young, highly touted quarterback surrounded by an extraordinarily talented roster. I don't think I'm picking them to beat Alabama, win the division, but we just saw A&M 2 years ago go 11-1 and almost get into the playoff as the number 5 rated team in America at the end of the year. Could they be the 4th rated team and be 11-1, not even win the division and get in? Absolutely. And once you're in, then it takes a certain level of athlete to win 2 games. And I think A&M is the only other team outside of Bama, Georgia, and Ohio State that I think can do that. I don't think, you know, you look around college football and you go, who else has the actual athletes that those 4 teams have? And, you know, Clemson's not even on that, in that conversation right now. They're close, but they're not in 2022.
And no reservations whatsoever that Jimbo, you know, has what it takes to do that. I mean, I know he won a national championship at Florida State, and like you said, they had a hell of a year 2 seasons ago, but it's kind of hard for me to look at last season and not think that was now, there's circumstances, of course, but, you know, losing to both the Mississippi schools, that LSU game was inexcusable. Arkansas, I mean, losses are starting to mount that shouldn't be there for the Aggies.
You know, college football is a funny game. The LSU one, you're completely right on. But at that point, the expectations in the season is, I don't want to say it's over, but like everything they wanted was already sort of lost at that point. First of all, you had the greatest Ole Miss team in the history of regular season Ole Miss football. So it's the best Ole Miss team ever. So you have to sort of kind of point to that. And I think the circumstances should not be overlooked, that you lose your starting quarterback 2 passes into week 2 and he never comes back and plays a game. And with all due respect to Zach Calzada and that one amazing night in College Station against Alabama, he really wasn't all that good. And I don't know why people think he's going to be a savior at Auburn. Frankly, I don't understand that. I think he's a average to below average, you know, backup SEC quarterback. So I think, you know, that sort of took the wind out of their sails. Some of there's no question it's a fair, you know, critique of Jimbo's, but again, 5th in the nation 2 years ago, clearly recruiting at a level that only Alabama and Georgia can really claim that they're on the same level with them. And we've seen him win a national title before. Like, I don't know how long he stays at A&M. I don't know how hard it is to work for him or play for him. I don't know if he needs to evolve the offense eventually and maybe run some form of tempo. But at the end of the day, it's hard to look at that roster and that coaching staff and not be like, yeah, they have all the things you need to do it, because they've got better players than, out of 131 schools, they probably have better athletes than almost all of them, with the possible exception of Alabama. And even then, I think you could argue 1 to 85, A&M is just as good as Bama, if not better. The difference being Bryce Young at the number 1 slot there, right, probably being significantly better than anything A&M's got.
Now, it would take a dream scenario and unfortunately probably some injuries to some of the top contenders. But let me just throw a perfect season. One of these 3 teams has the perfect season. Which would surprise you the least that they make and maybe even win the SEC next season? Arkansas, Mississippi State, or Kentucky? Which, you know, I'm not drinking drugs here, but I'm trying to give these fans some hope here. If one of them was to just, you know, have this miracle season like Mississippi State almost had in 2014, which one of those do you think most realistic? Arkansas, Mississippi State, or Kentucky?
It would not be Mississippi State. I could put that one at the bottom. I really like the Arkansas makeup, the coaching staff, KJ Jefferson being back. They're gonna have to replace Treylon Burks, of course. But that is, I feel like they, that is a really intriguing team. But that schedule is so insanely hard. Even a non-conference game against Cincinnati is going to be hard at home to start the year.
Mhm.
Kentucky, I have to refresh myself on their crossover opponents, but part of the reason I picked them to finish second last year and to have 10 wins was because of their crossover games and how their schedule set up so nicely. They got LSU and Florida at home in what we thought was going to be down years. Now they also have to replace two coordinators essentially with Liam Cohen and John Summerall leaving. So those are two really big losses for Mark Stoops, but stability, continuity, it's between Arkansas and Kentucky. I mean, the answer is zero. The answer is none, unless we start hammering bourbon and drinking drugs, as you said.
Which I do both those, just so you know.
Okay, well, I try to sip. It depends on how good the bourbon is. If it's bad
right.
bourbon, then I'm gonna hammer it. If it's the good bourbon, I might take it slower. Kentucky, it's interesting because they're gonna get Georgia at home. And if you can just beat, it's almost like the A&M thing. If you can just beat the one team that's dominating your division, you've got a chance to win the division. Now, they have not really done that ever, even though they've been close a couple of times. So Kentucky, you could argue the case for Kentucky is the path. They can win the East a little easier than, jumping over Ole Miss and Alabama and A&M is a lot to clear if you're Arkansas. So maybe the answer is Kentucky, even though I think Arkansas might be the better overall team. But those are both probably preseason top 25 teams, so they're both pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Now, which program do you got more confidence in that this coach can lead the fans to the expectations? And maybe these two programs, the fan expectations are a little too rich, but I'm talking Shane Beamer at South Carolina, Josh Heupel at Tennessee. Not necessarily next season, but just the future of those programs under those leaders. I know that's kind of a convoluted question there, but which one you got more confidence in to maybe kind of reach those vast expectations those fans have?
I mean, the short answer is Josh Heupel. My real answer is I don't think either. We'll get to where they are supposed to be. The difference is Tennessee's sort of big picture expectations when they do finally stabilize and they do finally kind of get back on track, and it does feel like they've got some adults in the room finally in the key positions to run things, that eventually expectations for Tennessee are going to be win the division and compete for an SEC championship. That's never really been the expectation for South Carolina, even though they've got a lot of the things you would need to be that good. I also think Josh Heupel is a far more established, far more experienced, and just far better football coach than Shane Beamer. So while the expectations are a little higher at Tennessee eventually, I think fans are happy right now because they showed progress. Mm-hmm. Again, a professional adult is running the program, which is a step in the right direction because that wasn't the case before. And I think winning 8 games next year is totally doable, maybe 9, maybe the year after. The question is, how long do Tennessee fans, again, Butch Jones won 9 games 2 years in a row, and that sort of people were uneasy about that. So how fast does that rabid nonsense come back into the Big Orange fan base is, I guess, the what you're saying there. I just don't know if Shane Beamer can even replicate what he did last year. I think Spencer Rattler is a fine player, but with a worse coaching staff and a worse supporting cast against a tougher schedule, why is Spencer Rattler all of a sudden going to be better than he was at Oklahoma? So I have major doubts about South Carolina long term. I think they're going to recruit like crazy, and the roster will be in really good shape for whoever takes over in 2026.
Mm-hmm. Now, one team that, you already referenced it, Ole Miss, they had a historic good regular season. Now, I hear that Lane Kiffin, he doesn't quite put in the work that he needs to in high school recruiting, but hell, they're killing it in the transfer portal, and this is just a new age. And I think there's a reason he's out here saying, A&M's buying players and all this. I think it goes back to his work ethic on the recruiting trail, but maybe he can sustain success using the transfer portal. We just never seen it done. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think he can keep that team and that program relevant by just focusing so heavily on the transfer portal?
I don't think Bill Snyder at Kansas State famously is the only guy I can think of that sustained a program long term with like junior college transfers.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like the only one. Now you can pick spots and get your guy. Like Alabama's doing that through the portal, like, and they do it like in a more disgusting way than anybody else. They're like, oh, we need a great return man and running back. We'll get Jamari Gibbs, and oh, we need a great corner. Here's Eli Ricks, and oh, we need, you know, like they sort of get the best of the best. I think you can do that to replace Matt Corral, for example. I think you can do that with Jackson Dart, and you can bring him in, and you're not going to miss a beat because he's a super talented kid that's going to run your offense really effectively. Can you build up a defensive, two deep through the portal year in and year out? Like, no, you're not going to be able to do that. Like, you still, the best programs, just like the NFL with the draft, the best programs in college football are still going to live primarily on recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
And Kiffin's got a lot of Spurrier to his game. He definitely, from the quips and the barbs and the language and sort of the personality on Twitter, like, how awesome would it have been to have Twitter with Spurrier around, by the way. He's, we know that he was drawing up plays, but he wasn't really recruiting hard. Lane's got a lot of that same stuff. I don't think you can build a two deep in the portal and compete with Bama and A&M and Georgia at like LSU when they're recruiting well. Like, you can't, you have to have like second and third, your second and third receiver, your second and third corner, your second and third offensive tackle. Like, you got to have your fourth defensive end needs to be a 4-star player. Like, you've got to have guys that can come off the bench and play meaningful snaps. And that's not, I don't think you can build that kind of depth through the portal or through the junior college ranks. I think you've got to do it through recruiting, and you kind of fill in the voids. It's great for a program like Ole Miss because they can, stay relevant quicker because they lose Corral and they get Dart. But to say that they're going to win 10 games again and, compete with the best teams in the country, like, that is hard to see without quality recruiting.
Mm-hmm. Now, on one of your recent episodes of the Athlon podcast, I wouldn't say, you were very careful with your words. So I don't even know how to ask this question, but you talked about Brian Harsin and what you think the thought process is down there. Can you kind of rehash that and what you think is essentially going to happen in the next year there on the Plains?
I mean, to me, I was shocked that they brought him back, but I also was shocked that they were trying to fire him in the first place. But then I'm not shocked by any of it because it's Auburn. So what you have to look at is just sort of use some logic. And I think the buyout goes down on January 1st, I believe. It goes down after the Iron Bowl, but not a lot. It goes down again, I believe, after the calendar year ends. And then, of course, you also give yourself 10 or 11 months to sort of line up in try to conduct a process, professionally, which, again, sometimes is difficult for Auburn. But, Harsin is a really good coach. Auburn's a great program. They just probably don't work together. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that Auburn gave him a fair shake. So Auburn deserves a lot of blame in some of this, at least not the university necessarily, but the boosters and the power brokers that probably love being in control of the program more than they might actually love the program itself. And so that's, again, I think it's unfortunate because he got that job and half the boosters already wanted him fired. They didn't want him to be hired. And so he was sort of like, they were looking for ways, and you lose 4 or 5 straight games. I would have been so, had they held on and beat Alabama, I would love to know what Auburn fans would have done this offseason, because would it have felt different? Well, no, wait a second. He did something no one else could do. He beat Alabama. Like, would we be knocked him out of the championship game in theory? So what would we be saying? What would Auburn fans be saying about Harsin if they just gotten one stop on one drive? Like, I mean, they had Bama beat. So I think he's gone at the end of the year. I don't know who the right person is for the job. Billy Napier said no. And now I think he's the right guy at Florida, and he did that for a reason. He didn't want to deal with all the extracurriculars. So I don't know what's going to happen down there. I would like to believe that making a hire in January of next year versus February of this year would be a more professional and more coordinated and organized process for Auburn, and that alone might be worth it, not to mention how much money you save on the buyout. So he'll coach this year. We'll see what he does, but like, if he doesn't recruit great and win 10 games, like, he's gone, in my opinion.
All right, last thing for you, Braden. I really appreciate all your time. And I don't think there's a wrong answer here, but who's going to be the better hire? Billy Napier at Florida or Brian Kelly at LSU?
Wow. I really love the Billy Napier hire. I really do. I think Brian Kelly's a great hire for a lot of reasons. He's won every single place he's ever been. It is a big fish move by Scott Woodward, who tends to make big fish moves. Straight gangster, as we call him. You got to be a gangster to be an AD in the SEC. Danny White's a gangster, by the way. I just think Napier took everything from all the good stuff from Saban, and he is, the way he approaches it, the way he sees it, and you couple that with his knowledge and experience in the area, being a guy that is a Southeastern guy and has coached down here forever. Culturally, he just knows the people and knows how to talk to parents and recruiting. I think he's going to recruit like crazy. He's building the staff. It appears that he's gotten the administration to buy in to what he wants, which is sort of what Dabo did at Clemson and what these guys do. They show up and they go, if you don't give me all this stuff, we're not going to win. Mm-hmm. And that's what it feels like he's done to Florida, sort of open up the pocketbooks a little bit. And Brian Kelly, I think, is really good. I don't, that's a home run hire for LSU. I just think there's some Kirby Smart type of upside with Billy Napier. And I'm not sure I would like with Brian Kelly. It's like, I need to see the recruiting. And if he can recruit, then they're going to win. LSU will be fine. Mm-hmm. Also, it's a tougher division, right? With Jimbo and Bama. So that's a tough question. Maybe I'm partial to Billy Napier, but Brian Kelly's a great hire too.
Okay, I really appreciate you, Braden. Give him a follow at Braden Gall on Twitter. Owner of 440 Sports. He's got about 24 podcasts on there. I don't know how he's got the time to do all that. Athlon Sports, Cover 2 podcast, ESPN national radio host. Braden, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Always a pleasure. Anytime.
All right, so just want to say thanks again to Braden for joining the show. First time on the show. And, of course, his partner there on the Athlon Sports podcast, Steven Lazen, who's been on the show a number of times. Now we've had the duo on the show. Maybe sometime we'll get them both on the show. That'd be pretty cool. But, really appreciative of Braden giving me that time. Like I said, I wanted to have him on the show for a long, long time, and I don't think he disappointed there. All right, but last thing before we call it a week here on the pod, let's kick it on down to Baton Rouge as promised. Brian Kelly introduced his offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock, on Thursday. So they did the defensive coaches on the last show. Go back and check that out if you missed it. But now we've got the offensive staff introduced down there in Baton Rouge. Mike Denbrock, if you're not familiar with the name, he was Cincinnati's offensive coordinator. Of course, Cincinnati went to the college football playoff last year, got smoked by Alabama, but hey, he played his part getting them there. And prior to be Cincinnati's offensive coordinator, he was Notre Dame's offensive coordinator. So the familiarity is there with Brian Kelly. Friend of the show, Adam McClintock, who runs his analytics model, had Mike Denbrock as the nation's #1 offensive coordinator last season. So that gives you an idea, LSU fans, what you're getting in Coach Denbrock, a multiple guy. And, that was kind of the theme of this presser here on Thursday. Before we get to Mike Denbrock, Brian Kelly was asked about offensive linemen. And I thought this, if you're unaware of, what they have been doing there in Notre Dame the last couple of years, they don't have a ton of skill when you compare it to SEC rosters. But where Notre Dame has excelled better than just about anybody in the country is on the offensive line. And they've been doing it year after year, put a lot of guys into the NFL. And that, if you're an LSU fan, that's got to pique your interest, because even when you won the national championship, I know your offensive line won the Joe Moore Award for the nation's best offensive line. But, LSU fans still, I think they would say that, while that unit won the award, they had their ups and downs. And aside from 2019, that outstanding team, basically, the last 5 years, aside from that one, the offensive line has just been a disaster down there in Baton Rouge more often than not. And that's considering, they got 5-star players, 4-star players lining the offensive line. So it's been a real issue in Baton Rouge, but really in all of college football, development and then identifying future stars at the offensive line seems to be at an all-time low in college football. One thing you're not going to have to worry about under Brian Kelly, given his track record, is the ability to identify and develop offensive linemen, and that's something Brian Kelly hit on here on Thursday.
There's a program in the SEC West that's recruited the offensive line at a high level, and they've been consistently successful, probably in part because of that. What have you identified in your career and now at LSU about that unit that is so pivotal to future success?
Well, I have a profile in mind, and Brad and I and Mike and everybody in the offensive staff has discussed what that profile looks like. And so, we're gonna recruit to that profile, and we're gonna develop to that profile. I think one of the keys to that, without getting into too much by position group, would be that offensive linemen can be developed, and it's a position that I look towards as a position of development, and that's physically as well. You don't have to come in ready-made as an offensive lineman, and maybe that's a bit of a change in a mind's eye relative to a profile.
And then last thing, this is everybody's question when you hire, an offensive-minded coach. Are you going to be calling the plays? Is your offensive coordinator going to be calling the plays? Brian Kelly addressed, how involved he'll be. And the way he says it, he's going to be involved on both sides of the football, which I think if you're an LSU fan, again, this is probably music to your ears because you don't want another situation where your coach is basically hands off on one entire side of the ball.
With the Athletic, you've delegated play calling duties the last few years. Will that continue with Mike? And regardless, just how do you imagine your dynamic between the two?
So let's get this clear. I call all the really good plays at the outset. Delegating those responsibilities was not very difficult for me because, for my time, it was so important that I spent more time with the players on a day-to-day basis. And so if you're in meeting rooms and you're tied up most of the day, with the other things, the collateral responsibilities that fall on the head coach, it's very difficult to build the kind of relationships you want with your team. So it allows me to be in the training room. It allows me to be at meal. It allows me to do other things and build those relationships with our players. Now, look, I'm still responsible for the football. The head coach is responsible. So this is not a detachment from anything. I'll meet with our coordinators. I'll be in offensive meetings and defensive meetings. But there's a difference between full detachment and still as the head coach, be responsible for end-of-game situations, timeouts, appropriateness relative to fixing things, as they go, and I'll still be involved in those things.
So after Brian Kelly got done speaking, his offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock, met with the media as well, and, kind of the same thing as what Matt House had to say yesterday about the defense. They've not really formed what the identity is necessarily going to be on the offensive side of the ball. Got to get acclimated to the roster and the players they have to work with. But here's Mike Denbrock on what the scheme will look like. And, I love the fact that he says, similar to Matt House, it's going to be personnel driven. I think this is the only way to have success at the highest levels of college football.
How would you sort of describe the offense that y'all are going to run here and what that scheme is going to look like?
I would describe it at this very moment in time as a work in progress. We certainly, you've watched Notre Dame football. Those of you who have had an opportunity to watch some of the things that we did at Cincinnati, there is a base of what we will be. We're going to be a team that plays physically tough, is going to run the football with effectiveness, is going to have the ability to stretch the field vertically and create explosive plays. Whether that's in the run or the pass game. And we're going to have a workable drop-back game where we can make sure that if we get into situations where we've got to throw the football, we throw it effectively and efficiently. The idea of, coming together as a staff and what we're working on even, as we kind of broke our meeting to come over here as an offensive staff and to kind of meet with you, we're in the process of trying to figure out exactly what direction that's going to end up taking. Is it we're a personnel-driven offense at its core, which means it's multiple enough that we can do what we need to do with whichever personnel group we decide to do it with. So I heard, yesterday, them talk a little bit, and you guys talked a little bit defensively about being multiple defensively and how important that was. We feel the same way offensively. It's going to be with 10 personnel. It's going to be with 11 personnel. It's going to be with 12 personnel. There were times in the last few years at the place I just left where we played with 14 personnel. So, it's going to be multiple in what we do and what we present to the defense. Can't run the same plays out of the same looks every down and have success against the defenses that we're going to play against. So it's going to be, an effort on our part to show the defense as many multiple looks as we possibly can, while not confusing the guys that are doing running the plays and executing the plays at a very high level. But we're just in the beginning stages of that. To say that we're going to run my offense, it would be pretty arrogant on my part, especially considering the talent that's in this room. We're going to run an offense that's LSU's offense, and we're in the process as a staff of making sure we get that straightened out and get the verbiage the way we want it, and get a lot of those details kind of ironed out.
You talked about developing that offensive style here, and just to kind of follow up on that, how much do you let the talent that's already here dictate that scheme that you're going to play, and then once you have that scheme, are you going to recruit to that or just kind of see what the talent holds in the state?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's, to the first point of it, we have to be what we can be. We have the players in the program. We're very talented, in my opinion, on the edges of our offense, in the backfield. Those players have to be utilized to their talent level and, to the expertise that they bring to the offense. And right now they're very physically gifted, and we need to make sure we're utilizing those guys. How much we branch out from that will depend on, obviously, the makeup of our team moving forward. I don't know that I have all those answers for you today, but that's kind of where it starts. Those are the knowns. And then we're going to give people opportunities throughout the spring to step into roles and earn their way into being more a piece of what we do moving forward. And that's really the best we can do at this point.
All right, so not as much entertaining quotes from the offensive side of the ball as we got from the defensive coaches on the last episode. But, hey, we're just weeks away from spring football, so we're going to have tons of more coach clips to play in the days and weeks to come. I hope you guys appreciated 5 shows this week. I'm going to try to keep that pace up as long as there's something to talk about. And when there's not, I'm going to try to make something to talk about like we have been doing. So I just want to give a shout out. This is the best February we've ever had. We've more than doubled our audience numbers than we did the previous February. So a shout out to all you guys out there, the audience. Very, very, very appreciative to everybody out there that tunes into the show, and hopefully get Cousin Shane on a couple next week. He's finally, like he said, finally done with all his work trips and everything. I know he's on his way back to East Tennessee right now. And hey, we're scheming behind the scenes. We're going to try to do some kind of, we've talked about it before, like a fireside chat. I'm going to drive down to East Tennessee. We got all the equipment ready to go. We're going to start to try to take the podcast on the road more, and this is going to be a trial run. We're planning on just drinking beers and shooting the shit and talking football. So we'll see how that goes. But if things slow down, it may be a perfect time to break out the first edition of a fireside chat. So be on the lookout for that. Not exactly sure when that's going to come, but we'll let you guys know. And until then, enjoy the weekend. Big basketball weekend here in the SEC, so enjoy it. And we'll catch you on the next one.